Bethel Church, playing us into the second hour of Inspirational Breakfast. And I've got a good news story to talk about this morning, a little bit unusual for this part of the programme. But it's a finding that a survey of 2,000 adults, the Church of England did some research, found that younger adults are more likely to pray than older generations. 56% of 18 to 34-year-olds saying they have ever prayed. By contrast, only 41% of people over 55 said they've ever prayed. So it's good news for younger people, but maybe it raises a question about why fewer older people are connecting with God. With us now is the Reverend Canon Jack Noble, who's rector of St Giles, Cripplegate in the City of London. Good morning, Jack, and I suppose I have to say you look quite young to be a vicar yourself.
I always say we're like policemen. We're getting younger and younger. That's one of my I'm afraid that's a pretty standard line.
Yeah, well, fair enough. Mine is a standard question probably. But this is quite interesting. And it's not the first time over the last year or so that this trend has been noticed, that younger people are more open to prayer and to God. Why do you think, or do you think that's true? And why do you think that is?
It's not the first time, but this survey, the results of which have just come in, is the most exaggerated result, if you like, in showing the gap and the fact that young people are even more disposed to pray. This survey showed that a third of younger adults, 18 to 34, have prayed in the last month, whereas only a quarter of 55 plus have prayed in the last month. So the trend seems to be creeping that way. Why it is, I suspect there's a load of different reasons. I think people on the ground serving in churches, and this may be true of some of your listeners too, in their experience and ministry and relationships, are detecting a real sense of spiritual hunger in the people of our country. And I think maybe an older generation grew up with the kind of routine of faith, but that quickly dwindled out maybe, or over the course of life, it's kind of been bumped out. But the young people are coming with a freshness and a hunger. And, St. Augustine said that our hearts are restless until they find their rest in God. There's something inbuilt in us that seeks our loving maker, and that seems to be showing itself.
Do you think in general that generation, the 18 to 30-year-olds, are more open to everything in a way, that they'll have a go at whatever comes their way, whether it's mindfulness or Buddhism or, drugs, or they're just more open and more searching spiritually?
I think that possibly could be true, a kind of a spirit of openness in this generation. I think it also comes with a disinclination to join things. There's a spirit of openness, but also a kind of, maybe it's a consumerist instinct of, I'll try that and I'll try this, but I'm not going to sign up for too much because that feels too constraining. So what we find maybe in prayer is a sense of immediacy and relationship without the commitment of signing up to your parochial church council and signing that electoral roll form or whatever. So it's a challenge as well as a real encouragement, I think, that young people are seeking God, but kind of not necessarily doing it in a connected way with the church or with other people.
So there we go. So that's an interesting challenge, isn't it? It could be slightly an individualistic thing. How do we make the most of that? Because I guess for many people listening this morning, there'll be that sense of, oh, that's quite encouraging. I sometimes, don't offer to pray for people because I don't know how it will be taken. So there's an opportunity there to recognise that there's openness. So in our relationships with younger colleagues or people in our family, how can we make the most of that openness?
Yeah, I think it's a brilliant question. And I really encourage your listeners and everybody we speak to and relate with to be confident in offering prayer, be confident in praying, because it turns out, so the survey tells us, there's a real spirit of openness, and you're not going to weird people out by offering to pray for them, or whether you offer them or not, pray for them, pray with them, pray in the workplace, sanctify the spaces that we're in. And it's not going to weird people out. Pray more. I think also there's a real encouragement to things like church schools. The churches educate a third of our young people. That's Roman Catholic and Church of England schools, let alone other schools. They seem to be doing a good job because someone's teaching these young people to pray. Someone's teaching them that prayer is something. So to all your listeners who volunteer or work in church schools and church youth groups and church outreach for young people, keep doing it. Something is happening. God is doing something. And I guess I'd always say it's about that. It's about those various doorways, those thresholds. That prayer is one doorway, and then it's our job to nudge people and invite the Spirit in, so that they can be nudged into the next doorway, which is to participate in the bigger story of God's love, this community over time and space. And actually, we do need each other in that story. Jesus collects his disciples together, all the local churches, these bands of people. It's an exciting and invitation. So anything we can do to take it from the individual into the communal, that's a really exciting possibility.
So we've talked about the encouraging signs in this survey around younger people. Older people, though, 55s plus, say 41% of them saying they've never, ever prayed. How do we address perhaps a spiritual hardness then in the older generation?
I think it's true. I think as Christians in the world, our calling is to be faithful and also to be authentic. And I think the older generation, maybe they've had bad experience of church, maybe they've had bad experience of Christians, and we're not going to win them over with something that is less than real. So to be authentic, to be gentle, to be people who prove our mettle and walk the talk in service of our communities, in living out our faith without double standards. I think it's about authenticity, whether you're young or old. That's the way that people see Christians and see something of the love of God in their lives. And that's been true in every age and place. But that's the challenge.
Yes, indeed. And finally, before we let you go, Jack, great to get your perspective on this news. One of the things I'm asking today is what have you learnt from a younger person in your life, whether that's spiritually or practically or something about the world? What about you? You've worked a lot with young people as a school chaplain before your current role. What have you learned from a younger person?
Well, it sort of links to what I just said, actually. It's probably where it came from, is that when you're put before 1,200 teenagers in a central London church school every week,
Not
you
for the
have to
faint-hearted,
know,
that.
Yeah, it's not for the faint-hearted, but it is absolutely wonderful. You've got to know what you're about, because if you come up in front of them and they ask you a question about faith and what it means to you and why you live it, and you waffle or you give complicated answers that kind of make sense if you're in the club but not if you're outside, you need to be a kind of a person who is what they seem to proclaim. And it is about that authenticity of life. Because I'm a follower of Jesus, this is who I am and this is what I'm about. And that needs to make sense, I think, to a young person, because they live in a world where everybody's trying to convince them of everything. And they therefore are quite skeptical and have a high threshold of credibility. And that is, in some ways, a very difficult landscape to operate in as a Christian seeking to share our faith. But in other ways, it's the most wonderful adventure of we've just got to be what we're about, because that's what the world expects us and needs us to be. And young people certainly expect us and need us to be that.
Brilliant stuff. Jack Noble, thanks so much for joining us this morning, reflecting on the news that younger people are more open to prayer than we might have previously thought. I hope you get to join us again sometime, Jack. Thanks for joining us this morning. In just a moment, we're going to look through the news feed of Phil Knox after this.